Yeah, good morning, team. Today we will discuss backups, and before going to the backups, we can discuss a recovery model and some other feature of the SQL server. Okay. So yesterday in the group chat I posted the one sentence as compatibility level. Okay. So the compatibility level means like whenever the SQL server version software released, that particular software will have the one compatibility level. Uh, uh, right now, I install the SQL Server version 2022. So the model database compatible level is 20. What is the number? I think 16. Like if I go for it, SP underscore WPDB. The compatible level is 16. If you install the SQL Server 2019, then that particular compatible level, it will come 150. Okay, 2019. If you go for 2016 SQL Server, then compatible level 130. So here the compatible level is the database level setting. So here, if you set the database level setting compatibility, what exactly means? What exactly that means, like the code will be written in the background, right? If you write the code in the background and uh, how it will behave in the front end, how it will behave in the database level, that will tell. Suppose like example, uh, uh, if you take any one of us, if you in a one your home, you will be behave like one kind of attribute, like attribute, like what you might say, some kind of behavior will behave in the home. If you go to the office, you can behave different kind of roles and actions you will perform. So that means one place to another place, how we are going to behave. Here, the backend, the application team, you will write the code that too suitable for the that particular software. So SQL Server is a software, right? So in that software, what they code, like they will use .NET framework. That .NET framework and some other inbuilt code like a PowerShell and some other uh, coding, right? So each and software they will mention some compatibility level code. If I use different giant, that won't may support 2019 for the latest code. Why? Because that code is fit for only for 2022, because they may use some PowerShell, they may use some Python logic, some may use some R language, and they may use latest .NET related joins. That code may won't support 2019. So that's the reason whenever you going for the latest version, that latest software must be suitable for the application. Application means that code must be suitable for the who are designed in the application like a front end. So here the database level, compatible level, we can change in the database level also. So here, if I go for database, if I go for AdiLab, right click, go for properties. By default, whenever you're creating the database, it will take the compatible level for the model database properties. Okay. If I go for options, see you can see compatible level 2022, that is 160. Okay. You install the software 2022, but you created the database 2022 compatible level. But when you application team deploying the code or when I'm trying to execute some score, like a code, that code is not compatible level to the SQL Server 2022. At that time, what we can do, we can go on here, we can change the lower compatible level, like 2019 or 2017 or 2016. So if the application is telling their code is not compatible level 2022, then what we can do, we can go and change it.
Adi sir, I had a doubt.
1 minute. 1 minute.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So now you can go ahead.
Yeah. The thing is like whatever we have installed,
Mhm.
incompatibility level, it is going to show SQL Server 2022 and the version or something it will be 160, right?
Suppose if you install the software 2022, the compatible level by default, it will comes 2022 because the software is 2022. So the
Okay.
compatible level will apply for model database. Okay. So
Okay.
whenever we creating the new databases, it will take model database properties and the compatible level by default, it will take 2022. So
Okay.
later we can change it if you want.
Okay. Yeah. Here's my doubt.
Hmm.
So whenever we installed, whatever the information that's stored in C drive, right? Like in
Like a
what else?
binary disk.
In notepads,
Hmm.
in binaries, all these things. It is going to store only 160, right? 2022. And
That
when we
yes.
change the
So
compatibility level 150 or 130, how it is going to take those?
no. See, the thing is like the binaries will install 160 folder. Okay, that is okay. But after you changing the compatible level in the SQL Server databases, right? The database is going to sitting into different. But that will take the properties from the model database. So the C program files 160 that is belongs to the binaries to keep. Once you install the software, that related software will take like keeping into the one disk location. That may be D drive, that may be C drive, some other locations. But once you install, what is the purpose of model database? It will create the template, right? Once we create the template, then we can change it. Like we have the person birth, like we are taking the properties from the our parent. But after we born, we can decide our life, right? How we need to live in our society, right? That may be software, that may be like the engineer. Initially, we can take the properties from the our parent. Sometimes if you want to continue your father occupation, you can go continue like a farmer. If you want to continue like a doctor, we can continue. But the things behavior will change based upon how you are behaving the currently. So for
Okay.
that,
Without installing the previous version, also we can use that, right?
yes. Without installing the previous version also, we can change the compatibility level to suit the previous code. Okay. By
Okay.
changing
So
into
that
the
we can get the binaries and use.
binaries it won't get. The code will support.
Okay.
The binaries won't get. Okay.
Okay.
In the C drive, we won't get the binaries. But what are the
Yeah. That is
databases?
my point. In C drive, we are not getting, right. So how we are using here? That.
No. So the thing is like the Microsoft inside they will mention the code. Okay. If the code is not fit, we can go and change the previous compatible level and go and utilize the previous SQL Server features, not for the 2019 latest version. If you change it to background, that will go and utilize the previous versions features, not for the latest. That was designed from the Microsoft code itself in the software.
Okay. Got it.
So,
So example question.
mm,
So you are at 160 right now, right? 2022 is at 160.
yes.
So you upgrade your SQL Server instances, say 2025 or whatever that comes up.
Mm.
But due to some reason after the upgrade, the application has some compatibility issues, and they say that we are good only till 160, not 170 or whatever that 2025 is. Then instead of downgrading the whole thing, even with the upgraded one, you just set the compatibility
Yes,
level from
exactly.
from this drop down to 160. The
Exactly.
application will work. That's what it is,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Okay.
The thing
Okay.
is like what will happen after upgrade, sometimes the application won't compatible. Like whenever they try to open the application in the front end, it won't open properly. That is the one thing. Sometimes what will happen, the query will perform very good in the like a previous code. Like a 2016, the query will perform very fast. Once you upgrade the 2022, the query, the reports behaving results is giving very slow. So on that scenario, no need to downgrade to the software. Just you can go and downgrade the compatible level of the SQL Server database. So here we don't have direct method to downgrade the software. We can go and upgrade from lower version to higher version, but we cannot downgrade the software from higher version to lower version. So that
Yeah.
scenario, what we can do, simply go and change the database level settings, because our code is fully depends upon the database level compatible level.
Okay. Got it.
You got it right? So the interview question will ask, the thing is like you upgraded the SQL Server 2016 to 2019. After upgrade the software 2016 to 2019, we upgraded the software to more CPU, more RAM, more Windows level IOs. But even though the queries are performing very slow, that means what are the query and what are the application there entering from their end, the results are getting very slow. So that scenario, what we need to do, we need to downgrade the compatible level to the previous version, so that the query will use the previous execution plan. Okay, using the execution plan, the query will get the previous SQL Server version compatible, and the query will execute very fast. So generally,
So basically, what this compatibility level determines is
the
the
how the query
optimizer or
needs
the
to,
query executor, how it is.
yes, the compatible
Okay.
level, it will tell how the query needs to execute, how the query it has to behave by the SQL Server database engine. So the database engine, it will provide the resource, how to execute and how to retrieve the data and how to move the data. That will provide the database engine. So once you change the compatible level, it will tell to the SQL Server, I need 2019 database engine behavior. I need 2022 engine behavior. So can you prepare accordingly the SQL Server engine compatible like execution plan? If I go for 2022, what it will do? It will prepare the database engine, the execution plan related to 2022. If I change it to 160 to 160, the execution plan will prepare according to the 160 compatible 150, that is called 2019.
Okay.
So the compatible level we can change two methods. One is graphical method, another one is T-SQL. Okay. So here we can go use like alter database name, set compatibility. We have to provide what are the compatibility if you want to use. We can go and change it. Okay. What I'm going to do, I'm going to execute here. Once I execute, no need to restart the database, no need to restart the instance. That will affect immediately. Once you execute the commit, by default, it's a read commit. No need to do any restart. Just go and execute. See here, Adilab database, compatible level, change it to 150. So the definition is the compatible level is a database level setting that will tell how the query needs to behave and how the query it has to produce the execution plan. It will tell. That is the definition, and they will ask, can we downgrade the compatible level higher version to lower version and the lower version to higher version? If the software having 2016, okay, like if the software is like a 2022, we can downgrade the compatible level. If the software is like a 2019, in this scenario, we cannot keep the database level setting 2022. Why? Because the software itself lower version. So that is the reason we cannot go for higher level compatible level. So the interview will ask test. Can we go for a downgrade or a higher like upgrade for the compatible level? Yes, but that depends upon the what are the software, what are the SQL version you install.
Sir, we can say like based upon the performance as well.
Because based upon the performance, right? See, if you install the latest version, we will get the better performance and we will get the new features. But your application itself are not supporting. So you have like a Royal Enfield, if you have like a race car, if you want to drive in the Indian roads or maybe village roads, that will be suitable. No, right? That code and that vehicle is suitable for the if you have the proper road, if you have the proper signal, then only it will eligible, right? Like that, if you have the latest version also, but inside the code, what we are writing, if that is not supporting, then definitely the performance will downgrade. So accordingly, we have to change the database level behavior as per the our code.
Okay.
So that is the reason if you want to do any upgrade, that has to well tested in the development and test environment. Okay. But if you even the well tested development and test environment, some scenario we cannot test the all the reports. Once the application or upgrade in the production environment, we'll come to know 100% results. So that's a scenario. Sometimes the application and the users will complain the queries are running very slow. So on this scenario, what we can do, there is a one method, like right click and go for properties, then keep it same as like a 160, but we can change some settings. Okay, here legacy code knowledge estimation. Okay, it's legacy code knowledge estimation. You can see legacy code knowledge estimation where it is. From 2022 is they disable? No, I can see, man. Legacy. Let me see this. Just take to the damage, take to target. The query parameter is read complete snapshot, data cross authentication. Here will be legacy coordinate estimation, not ledger. In SQL, the legacy coordinate estimation model is not enabled by default. This means that new database and queries related to the new more advanced coordinate estimation introduced later. Yeah, in SQL Server 2022, by default, they disable, okay? But we can discuss this topic like a legacy coordinate estimation. So what it will do, legacy coordinate estimation means like whenever the queries are supporting for a previous version, at that time, it will take lower version compatible level behavior. Whenever the query required newer version, that time it will take newer version. So instead of no need to downgrade here, simply we can enable that feature, enable legacy coordinate estimation. So if you enable that legacy coordinate estimation, based upon the query hitting, the database will behave. Like sometimes it will behave like a 2016, sometimes it will behave like a 2022. But from the 2022 onwards, that was disabled. Why? Because if we enable the legacy coordinate estimation, like stats are not updating fully. So we have a drawback. That is the reason they disable legacy coordinate estimation from the 2022 onwards. But we can discuss the legacy coordinate option in the performance. Why? Because sometimes by enabling that option, the SQL server will provide the better execution plan according to the query. Then the query will execute very fast. Those values we can see from the SP Blitz. Using that SP Blitz, and we can compare the query is suitable for which compatible level. Accordingly, we can change it. So right now you can understand only for compatible level, what is the compatible level and how we can change the compatible level for the database. So this is the compatible level. Now we are going to discuss about the backups. Okay. So what is the purpose of the backup? Why we need the backup? Okay. Here we have a computer. We have a virtual load. Okay. We have a virtual machine. The virtual machine or computer, the Windows team will take the backup. That scenario, why we need to take SQL Server backups. Okay. What is the important for the backups? Even though the Windows team taking the backups, but why we require the SQL Server database backups? So here the scenario is like the Windows team is taking the backups every day in the regular point of time. So in the 24 way, like we have a 24 hours, right? In the 24 hours, any one day, like 11 p.m. or 10 p.m., the Windows team will take the Windows backup. So if you want to something happen, if you restore the Windows, like a Windows backup, the backup and the database or the VM will come up to that particular time. But remaining time, what are the data we are going to enter our SQL server, that the data will be lost, right? So that is the reason from the database side, we are going to take different kind of backups to meet the customer requirement. Like we want to provide the customer with minimal data loss. If you restore, if you something happen, we have to provide the customer data with minimal data loss. Okay. So for that, how we are going to retrieve? That is a one thing. Like if something goes wrong, this computer, hardware failure, like a C drive corrupted, or maybe E drive corrupted. That scenario, what will happen? This particular software, this instance, this particular database won't come online, right? So that scenario, how we are going to provide the data to customer? Like hardware failures happen, how can you uh, give that? How can you perform the operations? And how can you give the data to the customer? And the natural disaster occurs, like any earthquakes, any flood schemes. What will happen? Our data center will be gone. Like data centers or maybe network cable, the communication will be lost. So if data centers uh, collapse, that means whatever the data we're keeping these computers, that will be lost, right? So that scenario, how we are going to provide the customer data, how we are going to operate the operations. So that means we need some backup, right? If you want to give the customer data, we need backup. Without backup, we cannot give the customer data and we cannot put the database to operational. So hardware failures, maybe any disaster occurs, we need the backup. Not only for that, if someone deleted the data, like we have a table. So we have a tables. So somebody deleted the table. So somebody, that means somebody misused. I want to that particular table. If you want to get the particular table, at least like if you need some backup, right? How we are going to recover? That scenario, the backup will use. So the majorly the backup will use required any hardware failures, any natural disaster occurs, or maybe somebody deleted the data. That time we require the backups and we are going to restore the database using the backup and we can get the backup. So we are telling like backup. So what is the backup and how many types of backups and how we are going to restore? That depends upon the some behavior. Okay. If the database having different model, that scenario, we cannot take all kind of backups. Okay. And also that is the one thing, if a database is in different model, that scenario, if you perform any bulk operations, that scenario, we cannot able to restore the previous data. That will decide one of the feature. So whenever we going to onboard the database, we have to make sure that option we have to keep properly. Then only we can perform the all the kind of backups. Then we can go for particular point in time restore. So before going to the backups, we can discuss about that model. What is that model? That model is nothing but a recovery model. Okay. So the recovery model, if you go for here, Adi lab, then right click, then go for properties, then you go for options. You can see like the recovery model. Okay. The recovery model, the properties it will take from the model database. If the model database recovery model simple, by default we will get the simple. If you want, we can change different kinds of the recovery models, like a full, bulk log, simple. So here, what is the recovery model? The recovery model is, like, let me tell you. I have a database. Whenever I create a database, each database will have two files. One is MDF, another one is log file. Okay. So the recovery models, we mainly design for to control the transaction log file, growth, and how essentially backups will performed using this recovery model. Okay, so the recovery model mainly designed for to control the transaction log file growth, and it will tell how the transactions are logged into the transaction log file. Like whenever we user perform the operations, those operations first it will hit to the transaction log, right? Once the transactions are hitting here, it will recording into the transaction log file. Then only it will go to the disk. So that means like how the transactions are logged into the transaction log. Like if you have one transaction, the transaction having a different attributes, like what is the transaction number, what is the transaction ID, what is that particular transaction object ID, and what is the previous object ID, and what is that particular transaction LS number. Like that, each and every transaction we have a certain attributes. That may be like we have approximately 120 plus attributes. Okay, those attributes, those information will come to the transaction log files. Once it comes here, once it's right here, once the checkpoint happen, then data will go to the disk. So here, the recovery model, it will tell, it has to record all the attributes. It has to record half of the attributes. The recovery model will decide. It want to record all the like attributes or maybe few. By keeping into the recovery model, that SQL Server engine, it will decide the transaction required all the attributes to be noted on the transaction log file or not. Okay, so the definition of the recovery model is, the recovery model is designed for that to control the transaction log file growth and how the transactions are to be logged to the transaction log file, and how essential backups we need to perform. So here the recovery models are three types. One is full recovery model. Come on. One is full recovery model. Another one is bulk log recovery model. Another one is simple recovery model. Okay. So if you keep the database recovery model full, that scenario, how the database will behave. If I keep the database in full recovery model, what will happen? What are the transactions are hitting into the from the front end or a developer, the transactions are must post recording into the transaction log file. Okay. So once the transactions are hitting into the transaction log file, at that time, the transaction are fully logged. That fully logged means like what are the transactions have attributes, all the attributes information will be recorded here. It won't leave any attribute. It will record all the attributes for the transaction. It will recording into the transaction log file. So if you record the all the transaction attributes in the transaction log file, what will happen? The transaction log file growth will be drastic. That means the transaction file will be grow. That means the transaction log file will extend in the disk. Like if you have a 10 MB, if you have the huge transaction, what will happen? That huge transaction, what are the attributes we have? Those attributes will recording into the this particular transaction log file. At that time, the transaction log file will extend because it has to keep those transactions in the transaction log file. So that is the reason the transaction log file will grow. If the transaction log file is growing, then we have to take the T-log backup. Okay. If you take the T-log backup, what will happen? So that scenario, we have to understand the transaction log file architecture. Okay. I can explain now the transaction log file architecture. So now just you need to understand what is the recovery model and what types of recovery models we have. So the full recovery model, that each and every transaction have all the attributes. The attributes are coming to the transaction log file. What are the transactions are hitting? Those are fully logged, and the transaction, the growth will be very drastic, and it will allow the to take the T-log backup. If you allow the T-log backup, we can take and we can utilize point-in-time restore, and this recovery model we can use for production environment. Why? Because we can able to take the transaction log backups and we can able to perform the point in time. So that is the reason we can strictly recommended use the recovery model in the production environment as a full recovery model, not for others. So if you are going to use full recovery model, what is the purpose of other recovery models? Like we have a other recovery models, like a simple recovery model and bulk log recovery models. So if you are going to use this transaction log file as a simple recovery model. So if you are going to use the recovery model as a simple recovery model, that scenario, how it will behave the transaction log file. If you keep the database recovery model as a simple, how it will behave. So if you keep the database in the simple recovery model also, what are the transactions are hitting into the database, those will be recording into the transaction log file. Okay. And what will happen? Those transactions are also fully logged. But the thing is like the transaction have a different types, like active transaction and inactive transaction and some other things. Okay. Now just we can go for little bit understanding of the transaction log file architecture. Then we'll come back to the recovery models. So the transaction we can 1 minute. I have some note. Let me go to it. Transaction algorithm. Yeah. So this is the transaction log file. Okay. So this transaction log file, what is the purpose of transaction log? The transaction will store the current transactions. Okay. The current transactions means like so what is the meaning of the transaction log file? The transaction log file is used to store the current transactions. What are the transactions are we writing? Those will be recording into the transaction log file, right? So each and every transaction will have a LSN number and transaction ID, that particular transaction image, and that particular transaction old image, and that transaction belongs to which data table, and that transaction belongs to uh, which particular row, like that we will have the transaction. Once the transaction comes here, what will happen? It will be recording here. Once the commit will happen, come on, I'm not able to write it. Suppose these are transactions. So here the transactions are enter. Once we perform the commit operations, okay. Once we perform the commit operations, what will happen? This will be moved to the disk, and again transactions are coming. So again transactions are coming. These also committed, and it will go to disk here. So again transactions coming. Once the commit happen, that will go to disk. So yesterday we discussed, right, checkpoint. Once the checkpoint means like once the commit operation, once the checkpoint happen, what are the transactions we have in the transaction log file, that will move to the disk. That is the purpose of checkpoint. So here, once the transaction comes, perform the activities. Once the commit is happen, the transaction will be moved to the disk. But what are the transactions we performed? That particular information will be stay in the transaction log. That means that person will, it won't truncate. Okay. So once the commit happen, the actual data will move to the disk. But even though data move to disk, what are the data as committed? That committed data will be stayed in the transaction log file itself. Okay. And this committed portion we can call like a inactive portion. Okay, what are the transactions comes and committed and moving to the disk? That committed portion we can call like a inactive portion. And what are the transactions are coming and doing the operations before commit? Those transactions we can call like a active portion of the transaction log file. So that means here the transactions are coming. We did not enter the commit. That portion we can call like a active person. In the active person, it won't go to the data until unless if you give a commit. If you give the commit, that person will go like a inactive persons. So here the theory is like the transaction log file will be divided into the transaction log file have a two kind of parts. One is active person and in another one is inactive person. Inactive person contain the data which are committed to by the user. Active person is still continuing the data without commit. So here what will happen in the simple recovery model? The simple recovery model, what will happen? Once the data is committed, before going to the simple recovery model, I mentioned the T-log backup, right? So the T-log backup, what will happen? When we perform the log backup, the T-log backup will apply only for this transaction log file. Okay. This transaction log file, it will apply and it will take the data which are having the transaction log file. That may be inactive, that may be active. Both the data it will take and inactive person will be truncated here. That means inactive person will be come on, press. The inactive person will be truncated. So if you truncate it, what will happen? This person we can go on utilizing for the upcoming transactions. So in the full recovery model, we can, what I mentioned, we can go and take transaction log backup. If you take transaction log backup, what will happen? It will apply the backup on the transaction log file. While taking the backup, what it will do? It will take the data from the inactive person and as well as the active person. Apart from that, it will truncate the inactive person. Okay. And it will keep the active person as a line. That means whatever the data keeping here, that will be truncate. If you truncate, that person will use for other transactions. Okay. But if we going for simple recovery model, what will happen? All the transaction will be regarding into the transaction log file. Once the certain point of time, like the transaction log file, the full 50% or 70%, the transaction log file full, because means once the transactions are commits, that will be commit. Once the commit happen, the data will move to disk. What are the data commit we have? That will be stayed in the transaction log file. Now one more transactions comes, that will be performed. That will also commit. That will also move. And the other transactions comes, that is keep on doing. Here what will happen in the simple recovery model? The Microsoft in the background, they have a certain algorithm. The transaction log file full 80 to like 60 to 70%. At that time, that mechanism will apply and it will truncate the committed person without applying the T-log backups. So once the data is truncated from the committed and inactive person, then we cannot take T-log backups. So what are the data is committed here, that will be moved here, and after some time the committed person will be moved, wiped up, or maybe truncated from the transaction log file. If the transaction log file inactive person truncated, then we cannot take T-log backups. If we are not able to T-log backups, then we should not use this recovery model in the business environment. So here the thing is like, if you keep the database full recovery model or simple recovery model, that the transaction, first it has to come to the transaction log file. Okay. Once the transaction log file comes, the data has to do here modifications, then it has to commit. In the full recovery model, once the data is committed, the data won't truncate from the transaction log file until unless if you take the T-log backup. But in the simple recovery model, no need to take the inactive person. Once the data is committed and flushing into the disk, after some time, the committed data will be truncated from the transaction log file. If the data is truncated, we cannot take the T-log backup. If you are not able to take the T-log backup, what will happen? We cannot restore the point in time. Why? Because so the data is moving to the disk. Okay. That means the data is keeping into the database. That means the database where it is storing this particular computer. The computer itself, the computer hardware itself, not able to log in. We are not able to launch the application. Then what is the pointing of like how the users will restore? If you are able to take the backup, we can able to restore, right? Here, simply we are moving the data to disk, but if we are not taking the backup, that scenario, we cannot able to recover the data. So that is the reason we have to take the backups. So while taking the backups, what are the backups? We need to perform. The performing the backups will decide the recovery model. What is the recovery model? And what are the types of recovery model? If you keep the database different types of recovery models, how the transaction log file will behave? Okay. We have a bulk log also. We can discuss later. But right now, what is the purpose of the backup? And what is the recovery model? And what types of recovery model? If we keep the full recovery model, what will happen? If you keep the simple recovery model, what will happen? These things we discussed. Do you have any doubts for recovery model? But I can explain one more time log file architecture. The log file will have different components, like a virtual log files, how the transaction will go for log reuse. But now, what is the recovery model and what is the purpose of, like what types of recovery models we have? Hello? Yeah. So the Microsoft document, what is the recovery model? The recovery model is a database property that detects how the transactions are logged, whether the transaction can be backed up, and what types of restore options are available. It fundamentally controls the behavior of the transaction log. That is the definition. So if we go here, if we convert these things, like how we can perform the backups and how the transaction will recording and how the transaction log file will behave, that it will tell the recovery model. The recovery model is the database property that will help when a failure of the database At that time, if you want to revert the data, that will, based upon the recovery model, we can revert. But by simply keeping the recovery model, we won't achieve our customer SLAs. For achieving the customer SLAs, we need to take the backups. Let me stop the recording and we can take notes. Not here.